Oh boy, this is where I started realizing what I got myself into. The client had already started stripping these old French doors before I picked them up, but he hadn't gotten very far. So the first order of business was getting the hardware off and figuring out what was actually going to work on all this old paint. He had been using Klean-Strip Premium, even leaving it on for a long time, but there was still a lot of paint left. Klean-Strip is pretty fast acting, but I was doing this in the middle of July during a heat wave, and I was fighting the stripper drying out almost as fast as I could work with it. So I switched over to Sunnyside Multi-Strip Advance. It's a much thicker paste-like stripper, which let me really lay it on heavy and then wrap the entire surface in plastic. That helps seal everything in and keep the stripper wet long enough to actually work through all those old layers. The downside is that this stuff takes time. Instead of coming back in 30 minutes, I was leaving it wrapped for several hours, and on some passes, even overnight. So I basically had to build the rest of my work around the doors, wrap them, go work on something else, come back, scrape them down, and then start the whole process again. But it was pulling considerably more paint, and for a restoration like this, I'd rather let the chemical do the work than try to sand all of this off. Especially with all these profiles and mountings around the glass. Once you start rounding those crisp details over with a sander, you're not really getting them back. So even though this was slow, it seemed like the safer way to preserve the doors, and as you can see, there was a lot to preserve. Number 1 steel wool ended up being one of the simplest tools that helped me the most. Once the stripper had softened everything up, this did a really good job pulling the remaining paint and residue out of the grain without getting overly aggressive. With this particular stripper, water could also be used to help soften the remaining film while at work. That's what you see me doing here with the brass brush. The brass was usually for getting down into all those little profiles and corners where the scraper just wasn't going to reach. You do have to be careful once the wood is wet though. The surface becomes easier to scratch and gouge. So this wasn't about scrubbing as hard as possible. It was really just patience and letting the stripper, the water, and the brush work together. And then you do it again. This was probably the 3rd or 4th stripping cycle in some of these areas. Apply it, wrap it, wait, unwrap it, scrape everything down, and somehow there's still more paint hiding underneath. By the time I was finished, I had gone through almost 2 gallons of stripper. It definitely tested my patience, but every pass meant less material I would have to remove mechanically later, and less chance of damaging the original profiles. Eventually, I finally got to something that looked like bare wood. These doors are old growth pine, and once I started sanding them, the goal changed. Now it wasn't about getting paint off anymore, it was about cleaning up what was underneath without removing more original material that I needed to. You'll see me using the random orbit sander on the larger flat sections and the detail sander in tighter areas, but I'm being pretty conservative with both. I wasn't trying to make these things look like they came out of a factory yesterday. I wanted to clean the wood up while keeping the shape and character of the original doors intact. And this is where all the glamorous restoration tools come out. Plastic razor blades, scrapers, chisels, dental tools, little pieces of sandpaper. Basically whatever could reach the paint without destroying the profile around it. A lot of this work is just trading speed for control. It would have been faster to attack everything with power tools, but these little details are what make the doors look crisp when they're finished. Once the wood was finally clean, I had another problem. I wasn't just finishing these doors, I needed them to match the existing woodwork in the house, and the reference door I was matching was oak. So now I'm trying to make old growth pine live next to oak without looking completely out of place. For the color I used TransTint dye mixed into shellac as a toner, and I slowly started working my way toward the color of the existing door. And here's where I screwed up. I was trying to save time and spray both doors in a cramped setup with less than ideal lighting. The toner went on darker and less evenly than I wanted. First, there's always that temptation to convince yourself, it's maybe fine. It wasn't fine. Luckily, one of the nice things about shellac is that alcohol gives you a way back. So I wiped the finish down with denatured alcohol, brought the doors back to the shop, fixed my setup, and lightened the toner mixture. Instead of trying to hit the final color all at once, I decided to creep up on it slowly. That gave me a lot more control. I ended up applying 5 toner coats to build the color, followed by 2 clear coats of shellac to finish everything off. And one thing I learned is that this old growth pine actually accepted the color much more evenly than I expected. If I were doing these again, I'd probably experiment with applying some dye directly in alcohol first and then moving to clear shellac. I think that could bring out even more of the natural grain. But for a first attempt at matching old pine doors to existing oak, I'm pretty happy with where they landed.